Hello, I'm here to ask you a favour before we begin this episode. I would really appreciate it if you could vote for Real Life Ghost Stories in the British Podcast Awards. Just go to britishpodcastawards.com/voting to cast your vote. You can vote once per email address and you have to verify your vote via email for it to count. It genuinely takes 30 seconds and you can vote from anywhere in the world. Am I likely to win? No. But do I enjoy turning a look at an event? Yes. And on a genuine note, it is such good free advertising for the podcast to have the name up there. So if you've enjoyed the podcast, if I've kept you company on a long journey, if I lull you to sleep at night with my dulcet tones, I would really appreciate if you could cast a little vote for Real Life Ghost Stories. And also, please do vote for any other indie podcasts that you listen to. The place to vote is britishpodcastawards.com/voting.
As dawn broke over the seven seas, the pirates of the Crimson Galleon set sail for adventure. But there was one problem: paperwork. Mountains of it. Filing, invoices, you name it.
This work ain't fit for a pirate.
Luckily, their captain had an idea. She used the smart buying tools on Amazon Business so they could work more efficiently and get back to doing what they do best. I know, right? Amazon Business, your partner for smart business buying.
Hello and welcome to mini episode 380 of Real Life Ghost Stories, and I have 4 spooky stories for you today, and the last story comes from the 24th of July 2024, and story number 1 comes from Abby. I listened to mini episode 369, The Bear, and I'm deeply honoured that you covered my story. I know you had some questions and I thought I might help answer them or add to the confusion. I also forgot a couple of stories but have since chatted with a mate of mine which brought these memories to the forefront of my mind. To answer some of your questions about the bear and rug spider, I was never one to struggle differentiating between waking and dreaming. I lucid dream naturally, which has occasionally led to a death-like sleep paralysis that I've never heard anyone else describe. But I'm always hyper aware of it and know that it feels so much different to being awake. Dreaming, for me, either has an airy quality to it or is beyond real. I feel things too strongly. It's like I'm hyper aware of my body, movements and textures. But when I would get out of bed, it was neither airy nor too sensory. I remember the cold, but not an abnormal cold, just the kind that accompanies evening, the kind that gently wakes you up. When looking at the rug spider in the hallway, I would always stare at it, hoping for it to go away as someone with arachnophobia. However, it wouldn't until I walked on it. This might be my fear of spiders manifesting as a shadow to freak me out, but all of my spider dreams are very sensory. I can always feel and touch in those dreams, and I could not feel the rug spider. As for the bear, I was, I hope, a somewhat conscious being by the age of 5 or 6. I was your typical gifted child and was always told I was mature for my age. I definitely knew what a bear was. The shadow even had ears and enormous paws and claws. That's how I knew that it was a bear. Maybe if paranormal things are indeed real, the thing chose the form of a bear as my sister and I had been given bear bells by our grandparents, and the book We're Going on a Bear Hunt absolutely scared the shit out of me when I was little. While I'd say it was probably this fear that led me to seeing the bear, I don't think my sister had this fear, so I don't know why she saw it. I did forget a couple of stories in my first email. The reason they came back to me was because I started catching up with a high school friend of mine recently, and she features in both of these. The first is just about my quote-unquote intuition. Every now and then I will be minding my business when I get a sudden urge to message a certain person or send them a meme or something. The exact thought that runs through my head is, I think so-and-so needs this today. Usually I'm right, A number of my friends have told me that they were grateful that I messaged them as they were going through some tough times when I did. Whenever I have sent a meme to a particular friend of mine, Bella, she has told me the next day that she really needed it as she was in the middle of a mental breakdown. This was during our final year of schooling, so mental breakdowns were frequent, and she would see me the next day and inform me of my vibe checking skills. The next story also features Bella. She and I were staying in an Airbnb with our 4 other friends. This was for an end of high school holiday. We were staying in a house in a small town. Bella and I were sharing one of the double beds, and most nights passed without incident. But 2 nights in a row we experienced something we couldn't explain. We were lying in bed trying to fall asleep. Our other friends dead silent when we heard footsteps. They started on the wall opposite the bed. This wall connected to our friend's room, so we thought it might have just been them. It was odd, however, as they sounded like they were on the wall, not the floor. The footsteps then began to climb up the wall, slowly, heavily. I know I wasn't going crazy because Bella heard them too. I heard the footsteps reach the top of the wall and start to walk across the ceiling. They stopped right above our heads. They genuinely terrified me, mainly because the thought of a person on the roof is bone-chilling. Then they were gone. I initially chalked it up to a possum because they're loud as fuck and one of the only nocturnal native animals big enough to make this much noise, but small enough to get in between walls. But this wouldn't explain the distance between steps or the weight of them. They sounded like a fully grown human. They had that familiar gait we associate with human footsteps. I got out of bed to check if it was our friends in the adjacent room, and they were just quietly chatting on their bed. I asked if they heard footsteps, to which they replied no. Confused but mostly tired, I went back to my room and tried to fall asleep. The next day I went to the second story of the Airbnb to see if there was a section above Bella and I's room where anyone or anything might be able to walk. There wasn't. The second floor only consisted of a small lofted lounge room and balcony, but these were both at the front of the house and our room was at the back. It was just roof above our room. With this, I was certain it had to be a possum. The next night came and it happened again. The footsteps started on the wall, slowly making their way up and then across the ceiling. Once again, they were far too heavy and the stride far too long to be an animal. It didn't happen again after that. Maybe because my other friend downloaded a totally legitimate Ouija board app the next day and I jokingly called the ghost a bitch. However, I can't explain how human footsteps could walk on the wall as if it were the floor and then seamlessly transition to walking on the ceiling. How could they walk where there was nowhere to walk? And how could no one else except Bella and I hear them? If you want to refresh your brain on Abby's story, the original story, it was episode 369, the mini episode The Bear, and it was released on July the 19th, so quite recent. And Abby, you are right, I believe it did indeed add to the confusion about the spider and the bear. Honestly, it just is such a bizarre thing to have experienced, and even more bizarre, probably even more terrifying. I don't really know that your sister also experienced it, you know, because it means that it happened, like something happened. Anyway, beyond that, your stories that you added today, I think it's a really amazing thing to have that intuition and to know when there's something going on with your friends, just intuitively to feel it in the pit of your stomach and go, oh, I feel like I should text that person, and then finding out afterwards that you are generally right, you know, that they needed a boost or a pick-me-up or somebody to reach out to them at that particular moment in time. What a gorgeous gift to have. And your story about the Airbnb, right? I wonder if the Airbnb was renovated at any point, because we've heard stories before where people have only seen, you know, the top half of apparitions, or they've seen some legs, like a bottom half of an apparition, and then they've realised that previously the house had a different layout, or previously the house was built over different floors and different stories. And I wonder if this Airbnb is the same. where there once was stairs where you could hear the footsteps going up the wall. And there was a room at one point above the room that you guys were staying in. And I can't explain why you guys could hear it and your friends couldn't. But I did have a really strange experience recently where I was doing a show in a particular room in Canterbury, and the musicians for the show were at the back of the room and I was on the stage, and everyone else on the stage could hear the music and I couldn't. And we realised it was because of the shape of the room, like whatever way the acoustics were, wherever I was stood on the stage, I couldn't hear the music because of the way the room was shaped, whereas everybody else could, and it was really disconcerting. It was so strange. So I wonder if it was that kind of situation where you had residual energy and then whatever way the layout of the house is meant that you and Bella were the only ones that could hear it and the other girls just couldn't hear it because of the acoustics and maybe the shape of the house or the shape of the rooms. Don't mind me, okay? I'm just a scientist.
This season, Instacart has your back to school. As in, they've got your back to school lunch favorites like snack packs and fresh fruit. And they've got your back to school supplies like backpacks, binders, and pencils. And they've got your back when your kid casually tells you they have a huge school project due tomorrow. Let's face it, we were all that kid. So first, call your parents to say I'm sorry, and then download the Instacart app to get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes all school year long. Get a $0 delivery fee with your first 3 orders while supplies last. Minimum $10 an order. Additional terms apply.
As dawn broke over the 7 seas, the pirates of the Crimson Galleon set sail for adventure. But there was one problem. Paperwork. Mountains of it. Filing, invoices, you name it.
This work ain't fit for a pirate.
Luckily, their captain had an idea. She used the smart buying tools on Amazon Business so they could work more efficiently and get back to doing what they do best. I know, right? Amazon Business, your partner for smart business buying.
And story number 2 comes from Maddy. So I've just finished listening to episode 45 about doppelgangers, and I have a story or an alternative theory. I'm a total believer in the paranormal, but I class myself as a skeptical believer. I'm not one that hears a noise or sees something weird and immediately thinks it's paranormal. I try to debunk anything like that before I come to a conclusion about what it is or what it might be. As I said, there is an alternative theory about doppelganger experiences that's a bit darker. I'm not saying that I 100% believe that it's true, but after some experiences me and close family members have had, I was encouraged to look into it more. A mimic is supposedly a malevolent entity that mimics someone you know well, like a close family member. There are some very interesting stories about them, some of which come with video evidence. Here are some of mine and my close family's experiences with what we believe is a mimic in my mother's house. I moved to Swansea from Kent 7 years ago, and my mum still lives in Maidstone. I only get to travel down to see my mum a couple of times a year, and I always stay at her house, sleeping in the living room. On a couple of occasions, my mum has walked down the stairs in the morning and gone into the kitchen to see me standing at the sink looking out of the window, with my back turned to her, wearing the pyjamas she saw me go to bed in the night before. She says good morning and I don't answer or turn around to acknowledge her. She then goes to the living room, opens the door and sees me asleep on the airbed, so quickly returns to the kitchen to find it empty. To get from the kitchen to the living room and back into bed before my mum opened the door, I would have had to walk past her and would have been in full view of her. There have been a lot of occasions when my mum's partner or one of my brothers have seen my mum walk past the kitchen from the living room and heard the front door open and close as if she has gone out. But when they go to look outside, she's not there and they find her sitting in the living room. Once again, she would have had to walk back past them and the kitchen where they were sitting to get back to the living room. My mum has also seen my brother poke his head around the living room door and look at her before walking off, just to remember that he is actually out, and after checking the house and calling him, confirmed that he was still out and nowhere near the house. The weirdest thing is, the only time she sees the doppelganger or mimic of me is when I am there staying in the house. My mum and her partner collect a lot of old antiques, books, photographs and other objects that they think would look good in their house. I believe that one item in particular they brought back to that house has something quite sinister attached to it. I also believe that my mum is a magnet for spirits or paranormal activity. Oh, doppelgangers can just fuck off at this stage. Like, what is the end goal? This is always my question, right? I personally, if they're a malevolent entity, right, what are you doing? What's the end goal? What's the point? So you pretend to be somebody else and then disappear. Oh, boo-hoo. Like, move on. Do something else. Like, you've got poltergeists who are out here, like, starting fires and stealing stuff and disappearing things and flinging furniture around, and you're just what? Pretending to be somebody else. Find your own identity. And I'm still not convinced that some doppelganger experiences aren't some weird time slip, alternate universe experiences instead. Maybe there are some places where, I don't know, time is thinner and you are able to experience these things more easily, and your mum's house just happens to be one of those places. Either option doesn't make it any less terrifying, to be really honest. And story number 3 comes from Miriam. I have a few stories I would like to share. The first one was when I was with my friend Emily. We were having a sleepover and it was late, so we decided to tell scary stories. Emily was one of my few friends who believes in the spiritual world. We did that for hours. But later Emily got tired and decided that we should try to get some sleep. That was my least favourite part. Emily fell asleep right away, but I just laid there in my sleeping bag. But a little while later I heard creaking on her wooden floors coming from outside her room. The door slowly opened and I saw a floating, glowing orb come into the room. I woke Emily up as quickly as I could. But when she woke up, it was gone. But she still believed me. The next story is a bit more disturbing. One morning I woke up with a few scratches on my arm. I told my mom, but she said I could have just scratched myself the day before. So that night I closed my door. But the next morning I had a big bruise on my leg. That night I made sure nothing could get in. I locked my door and pushed my hamper and a few heavy books in front of my door. I usually kept my windows open because it got hot in my room. Not tonight. I locked all my windows. And that morning it must have worked. There were no new bruises or scratches. But the third story is terrifying. I'm already scared and I haven't even started writing. I was at summer camp and we were doing a nature scavenger hunt. I got the woods. I really didn't want to do the scavenger hunt in the woods. The woods were creepy. Even though there were a few other campers in the woods, I was still freaked out. I entered the woods and started searching for the items on my list. I was in the middle of the hunt when I heard someone calling my name. I couldn't see the cabins. I checked the map and started to head towards the cabins. A few minutes later, I was walking in circles. Maybe I was reading the map wrong. The second I looked at the map, I started to hear a creepy lullaby. I stepped on something. It was a music box. I picked it up, and a few seconds later, I heard a girl scream in the distance. At that second, I ran as fast as I could until I saw the cabins. I told our counsellor about the music box and the girl screaming. I said maybe it was one of the campers in the woods, but our counsellor said that everyone who was in the woods got back a while before me. Miriam, I am glad that you have a friend who you can share your interest in the paranormal with, but also a friend who believes you when you say things, because I do think that's very important. I think the good thing is, right, if there, you can say there is a good thing about this, is that the glowing, floating orb doesn't seem to have been a negative thing or something that wanted to cause you harm. It was just a thing that you saw and that was it. And I actually, sometimes I think it's nice to think about those things as like maybe it was a guardian angel or somebody coming in to check on you, you know, just try and frame it in a nice way. I mean, the scratches and the bruises are less nice, and there's very few nice ways that you can frame that. What I would say is a positive thing is that at least you discovered that with your door locked and the window closed and locked, that nothing else happened, you know? And you're right, that third story is terrifying. I can't even imagine what it'd be like to be out in the woods on my own and hear a scream and find a music box. Absolutely not. I would be legging it back to those cabins as well. That is terrifying. I wonder if there's a story behind those woods, you know, if something happened in there previously, like years before. You did the right thing though, going to a counsellor and being like, hey, I just want to make sure that, you know, everybody's accounted for and safe. And luckily they were. So I wonder if there's like an old legend or an old story associated with those woods. Might be worth checking out. And our final story today comes from Greg. It was several months ago and I don't really remember when it happened. I was lying with my wife and then apparently I saw this shadow man do a dance, sort of like one of the covers from Catch-22, with arms held up and the legs doing the same. It was on the far wall near the door exiting our bedroom for no earthly reason. It was darker than the wall, and I went to turn on the light and then it vanished. Apparently in the same week, my wife said that as I was sleeping there was a shadow man looking at me as I slept. Sort of like staring at me while I slept, peering down. It was on the other side of the wall near the window that has an AC in it. We did cleanse the room. The weirdest thing of that same time frame was in the day with a presence nearby. It made me severely angry and I was already lapsing into a fit. Then the presence disappeared. I don't know what time it was. I know that it wasn't the night since I do a lot of night shifts. And it was maybe a Sunday or a Monday, which are my days off. That is actually my only ghost story. I want to add, unrelated to the Shadow Man story, that I live in Honolulu. I once went to the chain of craters in the Hawaii Volcano National Park. It's a dead-end road that leads to the lava arches, and this was about 2017 or 2018. I'm trying to stay fit and I was doing these series of dead craters. My wife was not having a great time, so I went through the craters. They were all these stone piles and I got a bad feeling as I went through a series of craters to the last one, and I got this feeling that I wasn't welcome. I stopped, and the surreal thing was that all these tourists were blasé about walking all the way to the end without consideration of the stone altars. I turned back and never got to the end. Luckily, my wife at the end of the chain of craters road felt better. I know that this is unrelated to the Shadow Man story, but I thought that I should add it. I don't like the idea of Shadow Man dancing. No. And I know that I'm always one that says, do something better, like do something nicer, find nicer ways to communicate, not dancing, because it's just infinitely disturbing. Don't do it. And I always find it intriguing that these entities are like darker than dark, do you know? That's a really interesting way to describe them. And the only time I have experienced that is, which I keep talking about lately, is when my room was darker than dark for some really strange reason. And it's a really odd thing. And I can't imagine what it would be like to see a person who was darker than dark, or at least the shape of a person. And also how terrifying for your wife to see this same shadow man sort of looking over you while you slept, peering down. Like, I wonder, was it something to do with the house? Was it something to do with like a period of time in your life that this happened? Or was it just a series of like odd, isolated events? And as for your experience running in Honolulu, running through like the chain of craters, if I was somewhere and I was somewhere that had kind of importance like culturally for Indigenous people, and I had a feeling of like, oh no, I feel like I shouldn't be here, I would be out of there. I'd be like, I'm respecting this feeling and I'm leaving, because I think that is probably the right thing to do. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Thank you to Abby, Maddy, Miriam and Greg for sending in your stories. Remember, the last story came from the 24th of July 2024. And if you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
Imagine the softest sheets you've ever felt. Now imagine them getting even softer over time. That's what you'll feel with Bowl & Branch's best-selling signature sheets in 100% organic cotton. In a recent customer survey, 96% replied that Bowl & Branch sheets get softer with every wash. Start getting your best night's sleep in sheets that get softer and softer for years to come. Try their sheets with a 30-night guarantee. Plus, get 15% off your first order at bowlandbranch.com, code BUTTERY. Exclusions apply. See site for details.